So my name is Tom Eichmans. Again, thanks for sticking with us if you made it through Cookbook, which was an amazing presentation just before this one. I am excited to introduce the Division of Design at the University of Washington, which is also a program that I went through a long time ago. So it's exciting to circle back again and make this connection again as well. The Division of Design offers a Bachelor of Design degrees in Visual Communications Design, Industrial Design, and Interaction Design, and a Master's degree in Design. The mission of the program is to advance the field of design through research, practice, and education. Annabelle Gould is chair of the Division of Design and a professor in Visual Communications Design. And she's joined here by students and alumni, which will be sharing their work as well, including Taylor Miles Hopkins and Raziah Ahmad. And I think I can turn it over to Annabelle now and take it away.
Hi, well, thanks for having us. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Can you see Keynote at this point? Yep, okay. Well, thank you again for having us here. Sort of wish we were in person, but we'll make the best of it. As Tom mentioned, who is an alum of our program, we do have three degrees: Industrial Design, Interaction Design, and VCD, which is the major that Tom came out of and that I teach in, and that Jamie Yen, one of the other organizers, teaches for us there. We have a Bachelor of Design and a Master of Design, and we've got projects to share with you from both. We actually are sharing 4 projects today, so each of us is going to take about 10 minutes. Raziah will share a project from Publication Design, which is a senior level course. I've got one from a junior level advanced typography class. And then I've got a video to share from another student who couldn't be here. Family's having a wedding. I can't believe he chose that over this, but so he sent along a video to share of his publication design project, which was also with Jamie Yen. And then we'll round it out with Taylor Miles Hopkins, who is currently finishing up her thesis and has done a wonderful set of books. I think each of these projects, they could probably talk for an hour, but we've asked them to just make it 10 minutes. So the one I'm going to share is from Advanced Typography, and it's called Homemade. And this was a class project that was done last fall. This is juniors in VCD. There are 22 of them. We had one graduate student who took the class as well. And for context, last fall, UW has been remote all year. And in fact, we went remote last spring. So no one is in the same space. A lot of these guys are living at home. They're either at home with family, or they're away and missing parts of their families. You know, as you recall, last spring was pretty tough emotionally with social unrest. School started for us in September. This project was started in early October. So we were still with the previous administration, kind of a lot of uncertainty. And so it just felt like hard to plan a project that seemed, I don't know, kind of heavy and intense. So I was really looking for something that could be collaborative, that could, you know, teach typography, of course, being my main goal, but something that could help connect people, whether it was connect with each other or connect with family and friends. I've done reso projects in the past with the class. That was another goal, is like, well, let's make something. Let's try and get them off printing from the Epson printer, which is what they would have been using, but we're not in the computer lab. These were images from a type specimen book that the students did in previous years, but you know, it just felt like, let's get away from design a little bit. And I happened to, over the summertime, much like everybody else when you're home a lot, saw this show called Taste the Nation. And I don't know if who's watched it. I happen to love kind of food shows, but this was a really wonderful show. It's on Hulu if you have access to it, but Padma Lakshmi, who is the host of it, who also, you know, is on Top Chef and a number of other things. She travels around the country and learns more about the cultures and the people that make up, you know, the United States. So she's in Texas learning the history of the burrito, or she's in Patterson, New Jersey, meeting with Peruvian families. And so she cooks with them, she learns the stories. And it just felt like that could be something we could do as a class. Also, full disclosure, I'm a cookbook freak. I collect them. I have, I don't know, 150 or so. There's a lot of interesting stuff in cookbooks. And of course, typographically, it's a great problem to have. Hierarchy, you got to deal with, a spread, which is the first time the juniors have ever dealt with that. So the prompt for this for each student was to write and design a recipe based on your own immigrant story, knowing that, while plenty of these students have lived in Seattle all their lives, their grandparents haven't, or their parents haven't. So that was kind of the premise for this. And we were going to create a class cookbook and produce it, and they would be able to get copies. So, Google is the best friend for a lot of this. Again, we're remote, so we used a lot of shared Google Docs for this. So I created the sort of categories for recipes. I've designed a few cookbooks in my day. So, and I designed books too as well. I've actually worked with Tom before. So I would give them the categories and they had to first write out their cookbook, which meant in some cases going back to mom or granddad and finding out, what was needed. And then I asked them to each read another recipe and edit it, make sure it made sense. And of course, if any of you have ever designed books or been involved, that requires a lot of time and attention to detail. From Google Docs, we moved to spreadsheets because then it became, well, how do you organize all this? What kind of cookbook do you make? So we looked at, the beginning of information design, the categories of latch. Do you go by location? How do we organize based on geography? Do you go by alphabet? Well, it doesn't really make sense in a cookbook to organize recipes alphabetically. Time, either time of day when they're served or how long it takes, category or hierarchy. And, we ended up organizing it a couple different ways, but the obvious ones became breakfast, lunch, dinner, and dessert. We used Google Slides for critique. And so the students, this was again, we're all remote, so we're having to figure out a way to communicate, but slides worked pretty well because people could drop their designs in their various iterations. People could leave comments off hours, but other people could just share their various designs. It was actually pretty efficient considering that when we're in class, you've got to switch out laptops and kind of reconnect to the projector. So it worked pretty well. From my perspective. After that, that sort of process took about 3 weeks. We're on the quarter system, so it's about a 10-week quarter. We moved on to other projects, but I continued to edit with them. And so they would, post a PDF. I would print it at home and I would mark it up just like an editor would, kind of going crazy with that. But we went through 3 or 4 rounds of this through the rest of the quarter while they're working on other things. I would just email it back. These were crappy, just black and white pictures that I would take on my phone and send it back. And it taught them how to check kind of proofreader marks too. The cover, we did print Riso with this. In the end, we used paper press punch for this. The studio out of Seattle, I think they presented last week. The cover and the divider pages were very collaborative. So every student got their own recipe to do what they wanted with on their own spread. We unified through just the color blue that we made it. They made a choice of it could have been blue or black. We chose like, okay, we got to unify somehow. And then the images on the front were illustrations that students did that are basically ingredients pulled from all the recipes. So like I said, we ended up categorizing by breakfast, lunch, dinner, and dessert, but we did make, or there were 2 students that worked on this spread. They made a spread that sort of showed where the recipes traveled from. And that large building on the left is the School of Art where we all wished we could have been. So they kind of took little stories and represented them here. So divider pages, and then again, another student took on the design of these, knowing that they were working with Riso for the first time. The pages are bound, it's side sewn, and these little round things is maybe hard to tell on Zoom. These were plates. They asked each student to contribute a plate that was special to them or had a story behind it, and so their name is kind of attached to that. So it was just sort of nice to see them kind of work on some of this. I didn't initiate that as a suggestion at all. So it was really great to kind of give them the space to work out these divider pages. So here are a few spreads. Each one had its own story. They would write where it came from. This particular student who has an Irish background talked about how her mom would make these scones for her to take a bunch of them to school. So she's included pictures of herself. This was another student who, this was a special dish that her dad would make for her. And then she wouldn't, the eggplant itself originates from an area in Japan where she grew up. And she missed seeing her dad. She didn't see him as often after the divorce, but you can see the designs are different, and they chose blue, but the other color they could pick was whatever they wanted. This was a student who, very labor intensive to make, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, birria, but it is, I've heard it two different ways. It's sort of 4 hours of cooking meat. But this he would do with family celebrations when they went back to Mexico. And this one's printed with the pink. It just really pops in Riso, which was lovely. And then in the dessert section, one example was a student who grew up, they had this massive plum tree. And so every year they'd make this, they called it the plum duff. And so, again, sharing images and stories from their families. So this is the book, full disclosure, like I made this animation at home. The images would be better if we were on a copy stand, but here, I'll just play this for you and read quickly. Homemade is a collection of recipes that hold special meaning for each member of the class. These dishes serve as reminders of childhood moments, beloved family members, and heartwarming occasions. Some recipes have traveled great distances and have been passed down through many generations. The individual design decisions are as diverse as the recipes themselves, yet consistent use of a 5-column grid, the color blue, and page number placement ensures that the publication remains cohesive. And the back cover was actually a screenshot of us from Zoom, just to kind of share, where it came from. And the word homemade, it references the origins of the recipes themselves because they came out of families, but also the fact that this was all made from home. The Riso printing was paper press punch, and it was side sewn. And we really wanted to do that. We have industrial sewing machines at school, but they are not thick enough to get through this paper. But we were lucky enough that one of my colleagues who recently retired happens to be neighbors with someone who sews leather. And so he saved us by being able to side sew these. So they're side sewn with this sort of hot pink, which works quite well. We are going to put some in the pop-up shop that you guys have put together. And then on our Instagram feed, which is at _UW Design, we'll probably give a few away in a couple of weeks once the show is over. I think we were going to kind of do a fun post it and then have people share their own stories and then do a drawing based on that. So yeah, that's my project. I'll stop share, and I think I'll hand that over to Raziah, who can share hers.
Hi, everyone. It's nice to be here. Thank you all for joining. I'm going to present the publication that I made in Jamie's class. So let me see if this will pop up. Let's see. Okay. Can everyone see my screen okay? Awesome. So this was a publication that I made in winter of 2019. So that was, or fall quarter of 2019. So that's when I was in Jamie's class. And similar with the recipe theme, this book is also inspired by a recipe, but it's inspired by this recipe book that my mom started for us when we were all kids. And so a little bit about me and my background. I'm Pakistani Malaysian, and so growing up, I grew up in Malaysia, but ethnically my family's Pakistani. So at home, it was always a fusion of different languages and different foods as well that we ate. And being from my culture as a woman, food and being in the kitchen and being able to make food was something that my mom thought was very important. And so she wanted to pass that down to my sisters and I. And so she had started off this book that was just like a basic exercise copybook, basically, that you could get at any mini market there in Malaysia. And because she spoke Urdu and she also wrote in Urdu, the book actually starts from the back. And so that was something that I wanted to explore with as well. So this book is really old, it's really grimy, and it's just something that I always kind of grew up with. And it was something that was very important to me because I had a lot of mixed feelings about, my mom's wishes for me to be in the kitchen all the time, learn certain things. But at the same time, it was a very beautiful piece of work that I would like to remember because it has my mom's handwriting in it. And I think that's something that, being a designer and liking typography and all that stuff, but like being able to like someone's handwriting, and especially my mother's, because she's, one of the first in her generation of women to be educated enough to be able to write, was something that was very important to me. And so this book has a lot of different situations where, now this handwriting is my older sister's, and it was definitely something that my mom would want each of us to kind of contribute to it. And there's little cutouts and things, and there's recipes that didn't work and recipes that did work. And I wanted to share one of the recipes that I had written down when I was a little kid. My mom had come to me and she was like, I want you to kind of write a little recipe book and then we'll try to make it and see if it happens. And so this was like, young Raziah, her handwriting looks different. And I had made this little recipe and I wrote it in there. And then the recipe, when we tried it, it didn't work out right. So then my older sister wrote like failure on top of it, so there's like, it's like a collection of memories, and it becomes less about the recipes themselves and more about this collective experience that I share with my family, and specifically the women in my family. And, there's a lot of different notes, and it became like an experience. And so that's kind of what I wanted to kind of capture and memorialize in my book. And so my book is called Recipes of Women. And it also was something that I wanted to explore throughout design school. I really wanted to be able to explore typography that used the Arabic script, because that is what the Urdu language is also written in. And so this was my first kind of attempt at being able to create design that explored both the Latin script that is in English and then the Arabic script. And so this was, this was a very personal book. I think this is like the most personal project that I've ever probably made. And so I kind of sectioned the book in a couple different parts, where there's a preface and then there's a first section, middle section, and an ending section. And these are all collections that I kind of wrote that were original writings based off of like, previous diary entries or certain things of just kind of how I had felt a lot about it. And so this kind of book explores little bits, and I'll just kind of go through it. And I wanted to have little moments where it would be able to kind of tell you the language in which I'm using as well. So Ammi is what the word is for mother, and then Beti is what the word is for daughter. And that was the dynamic that I had with my mom. So, this mother-daughter dynamic was something that I have kind of struggled with, but it's also something that's very important to me. And so I mentioned, like this book is biased because if my mom probably read any of these recollections, she might be like, that's not how life happened. But then to me, I think that's like the kind of beauty of it all, is that two truths can exist both at once. And so kind of wanted to explore. I can just kind of slowly go through. And I wanted to have scans of the recipe book in there, more so not to focus on the recipes themselves, but to explore the experience of the recipe book. And so these are kind of just little entries about my experiences. And, we had little moments in there where it was like an empty recipe as well, and just kind of being able to explore that. And so one of the things for me was I wanted to make this book black and white, the colors to be based off of the color of the pages. And so that when the book is closed, you can kind of see that it's kind of has this color layers throughout it all. And that to me was like signifying the way that when you cook, there's a lot of different layers and there's a lot of different spices and ingredients that you might use. So you can see, little spelling mistakes as well, but it's just like, it's something that was very near and dear to my heart. And I knew that one day this book is no longer going to exist, or it's going to ultimately rip apart in some form because it's continuously used in the kitchen. And so this is just kind of some explorations that I wanted to have. So this one, you know, the word is jaldi karo, and that meant hurry up. And it was something that, you know, my mom didn't tolerate slowness in the kitchen. So this is something that I've heard a lot. Or, you know, there's a spoon, which is called a chamcha, and it's used for cooking and disciplining the kids. And so it was just, you know, these little moments that I wanted to kind of remember. And yeah. And so I feel like looking back now, this, you know, it's been a little bit more than a year since I made this. And I'm very much like, oh, I don't know, like it's kind of cringy to look back at these writings, but at the same time, you know, it's important for me to remember that it's continuously, this kind of relationship of a mother-daughter is something that isn't stagnant, and it always takes different forms. And then it ends with this. Because if somebody were picked it up, I remember when we were showcasing it in class at the end, a lot of people wanted to open it up from here, but then, you know, it's meant to be read from here, even though it makes it kind of confusing because in English it's, you know, flipped. So yeah, that's my book. Thank you, everybody.
Well, Raziah, I have to say that was fun for me to see because we went remote last spring, so we couldn't have an in-person show. Okay, it's back to me to show Philbert's video, and I will make sure that the sound is on. And I'll put this in the chat too when it's done in case it's jaggy or lags in any way.
Hello everyone, my name is Philbert Widjaja, and I'm a Visual Communication and Design Senior at the University of Washington. Today, I'll be sharing a book I created this past autumn for my publication design class, led by Professor Jamie Yen, entitled Spaces and Stories. In short, Spaces and Stories blends architecture and prose to craft new imaginaries for the events that unfold within homes around the world. Each chapter is designed to reflect the unique ambiance and personality of the showcased home and navigates through these spaces through humble, everyday, and familiar lenses. The concept for Spaces and Stories emerged from my long-standing appreciation for architecture, specifically in regards to residential buildings. My fascination lies with the way these built structures respond to the environment around them and influence their occupants' everyday lives. However, when I've learned about architecture in a few of my college classes, the focus is always on the formal technical qualities of these buildings, which I guess is fair for the type of class it is. While I appreciate the formal beauty of these buildings, what draws me most to architecture is how these built environments house countless stories, narratives, and histories. So when coming up with the concept for my publication, I wanted to ask myself a few questions. How might a book transport readers to places they've never been? How might a book provoke readers to redefine what home means? How might a book breathe life into static spaces? And how might a book encourage readers to use imagination as a way of knowing? To achieve my goal of presenting architectural homes through humble, everyday, and familiar lenses, I decided to pair each home I explore with a piece of prose. My hope is that by combining the evocative images of these homes with an equally evocative text, I could create a unique dialogue between type and image and craft an entirely new narrative for the events that happen within these spaces. Moreover, rather than using professional photography that overly sanitizes the character of buildings, the imagery I selected for each home is sourced from everyday photography found on Flickr, Instagram, or even Booking.com, which offers a more grounded perspective of what the homes actually are. As for the prose, I selected only bits and pieces of these longer texts. By fragmenting and recontextualizing the writing, I create a new narrative that departs from the original story and leaves more room for the imagination to finish. For the design of my spreads, I wanted each main chapter to reflect the unique ambiance and personality of the selected home. While the primary typeface remains the same throughout the book, the layout, colors, and typography vary section to section, allowing each chapter to take on the one-of-a-kind personality of the space. As for the front and back matter of the publication, I designed them in a more neutral manner to act as the overarching curator of the book. Spaces and Stories begins with the table of contents displaying the 4 homes the book will explore: Casa Estudio Luis Barragan, Nacagan Capsa Tower, La Morala Roja, and House M. Horn. There is also a short author's note to provide a little bit of context. Chapters are separated with color pages to act as bookends from one story to the next. The first chapter explores Casa Estudio Luis Barragan through the lens of the novel The House on Mango Street by Sandra Cisneros. The colors are vibrant but inviting, and the typography is bold and sometimes askew. I aim to capture the energetic and spontaneous nature of the narrator, a young girl who wants nothing more than the home she is proud of, while balancing the juxtaposing tone of lingering sadness due to the fact that this isn't her reality. The second chapter navigates to the Nacagan Capsa Tower through the lens of the novel A Tale for the Time Being by Ruth Ozeki. The layouts in this section are crammed and modular to reflect the enclosed, blocky structure of the building. The narrator is an occupant that has just moved here and is lost on his purpose in life. Type extends and fills pages as he is overwhelmed by his emotions and feels confined in this claustrophobic space. But thankfully, he has his dear old Chico to guide him along the way. The third chapter explores the mysterious residence of La Morala Roja through the lens of Death in Spring by Mercedes Rodoreda. Type blends into its surroundings like it doesn't want to be seen, much like the many secrets the narrator uncovers as he moves into this beautiful but perplexing village. The lively pink hues of the building are situated on top of black page spreads to allude to the ominous and vacant reality of the space. The fourth and last chapter moves through House M. Horn through the lens of the poetry book Clearances by Seamus Haney. The layout and graphics are simple and unfussy, much like the default personality of the home. The typography follows the narrator as he navigates through the space in a domestic and everyday manner, but remains cautious at the chance of disruption. The publication concludes with a grid of captions for the many images utilized in this book. Spaces and Stories is a hand-bound publication printed on 176 GSM Mohawk superfine ultralight paper, consisting of 10 kettle-stitch signatures enclosed in a hardcover case with black bookcloth. The cover and spine are screen-printed with white ink. Spaces and Stories is one of my favorite projects I've worked on during my time at UW Design. I was excited to explore architecture by using storytelling and imagination as a way to move through spaces. It was fun to play with the different styles of combining type and image to create unique and distinct chapter designs that each had a personality of its own. I am also proud to share that Spaces and Stories has been awarded in the 67th TVC Communication Design Competition and has received the Certificate of Typographic Excellence. Many thanks to my professor, Jamie Yen, for supporting me throughout this project, and thank you all for listening. Peace.
The musical interlude, and now Taylor, round it out.
Hey everyone, thanks for being here. Let me get my screen set up. So hi, I'm Taylor Miles Hopkins. I'm a Master of Design student at the University of Washington, and I'm currently finalizing my thesis, tomorrow's book, Artifacts in the Anthropocene, which is using the book's form as a storytelling tool for communicating future environmental projections. My thesis chair is Annabelle Gould, who's also here, and Jamie Yen is also on my committee, so they're very familiar with the whole project. So this past year, I've researched, designed, and documented this thesis, and I'm really excited to show you the completed books for them. My thesis really started when recognizing that while many people know the future projections of climate change and other human influences on the environment, it can be a little bit difficult for us to really understand how the world might actually alter and how it might even affect us on a daily basis. I found that people best understood this abstract and complex information when sharing anecdotes with one another, consuming media narratives, and using physical and visual cues. So with that in mind, it felt like the book as an artifact was a really great combination of all these types of storytelling devices. I decided to focus on 3 impacts in particular, which are extensive waste, biodiversity loss, and increasing levels of carbon dioxide. Each book takes place in their respective projected future, showing how a book designer has to address the challenges of a changed environment. And each book also has an introduction to this world that I built, and a user entry to peek into the life of the book's owner. So the first book, I have a little video going on here. The first book explores projections of extensive waste. So right now, human-made objects actually outweigh the Earth's biomass, and this number is projected to triple by 2040. And even if this study considered waste that we find in landfills, we would have actually surpassed the Earth's biomass in 2013. So it is a pretty big problem going on right now. So Found, Poetry Anthology for the Natural World, is from an artificial island off of New York City in the year 2105. As more human-made objects were produced to be disposable, it became difficult to keep up with handling waste. So to address this problem, people have relied on building artificial islands, which are made of compounded, incinerated, and shredded trash built right in the ocean. These islands help rein in waste from these dense communities while also providing more living and recreational areas for them. This book is given to the user, who is one of the first residents of the island and works at the local facility that handles the trash. It's given to them by a publisher who is using collected and found materials to make books. The Nature Poetry Anthology is really meant to juxtapose their lives on an island of trash to really reflect on how much their environments have changed. The book is made from found materials. This brown paper here I actually handmade from cardboard wrappers, newspapers, little pieces of plastic. And so the pages are layered together with a sheet of a plastic transparency sheet to create a feeling of abundance with this layering, along with around 7 typefaces to continue this idea of excess. The pages are also unbound in a cardboard case because all the materials for producing books on this island need to be collected. Making a book would feasibly take a bit longer. So by having the pages unbound, the reader can actually start the book before it's fully completed and receive pages as they're being printed. This next book focuses on projections of biodiversity loss. A study conducted by the University of Sydney found that all insects could become extinct in the next 100 years, which was a really shocking data point for me. This really includes pollinators like bees, moths, and butterflies, which are really crucial for producing many of the foods that we eat. Recipes for Scarcity is a cookbook from Jonesboro, Arkansas in the year 2133, which has been passed down through a family for generations. In this future world, insects have been completely eradicated. Produce like apples, blackberries, tomatoes, and broccoli have disappeared due to the extinction of pollinators. As produce becomes less accessible, humans have to depend more heavily on starches like wheat, corn, rice, and potatoes, which don't need to rely on pollinators to bear fruit or produce seeds. And so this user is given the cookbook by her aunt on Thanksgiving. Her great-great-grandmother had collected their family photos and recipe cards and placed them in a book, along with pockets of seeds as she witnessed foods becoming more scarce. The recipes are annotated and adapted over time to replace inaccessible foods with ones that are easier to find. And so there are also spreads with layered pages that show that once the reader has moved the page or image, the image behind it is affected, just to further that point that humans really influence the environments around us. And this book is meant to feel handmade and constantly in flux. Family photos can be removed and put back. Recipe cards can be taken out and used. Pages can be removed and replaced with the ring binding. And seeds are stored to be planted once again in the future and then added when more are found. The cover and title pages are embossed so that they appear blank until the reader actually looks at them from a different angle or in a new light. And so this book really acts as not only a way of saving disappearing biodiversity, but as a preservation of family traditions as well. And so this last book explores projections of increased atmospheric carbon dioxide. Researchers at the University of Washington found that as carbon levels rise, plant leaves become thicker and denser. So while some areas in the United States will see hot and arid conditions, which is usually what we think about with climate change, there are other places like Western Washington that will experience even heavier rainfall, which will help promote this plant growth alongside higher carbon levels. Adaptive Guide to the Deep Trees is a field guide from the deep trees, previously known as the Olympic Peninsula in Washington state, in the year 2251. As carbon levels rose in this future world, plants began to grow faster and denser due to increased photosynthesis. Communities began to move into these areas of deep growth, which provide shelter from hotter temperatures and act as bubbles of breathable oxygen for humans. While the forests protect these communities, they also shroud them in darkness. With such thick growth and leaves, little sun is really able to shine through. So between these larger spreads and the smaller ones that they provide technical terms and diagrams so that a reader doesn't have to flip between pages in the dark to be able to find the information they need. And the guidebook uses bioluminescent technology to be able to glow even in the darkest corners of the deep trees. This ensures that the reader who maps safe areas for their community is able to use the guide wherever they are. And if the reader is in an area with unsafe levels of carbon dioxide, the paper contains a sensor that turns it bright orange as a warning for them to get out of that area. So thank you so much for being here and for your interest in the books being designed at the University of Washington. And if you would like to see more about these 3 books that I showed today, they will actually be on display at the Henry Art Gallery starting May 29th.
That's it from UW. There were 3 food themed in there somewhere. That was not intentional. We just got food on our minds in the last couple of years, but that's what we have to share today. Thank you for listening.
Thank you all so much. Looking back through the chat to see if there are any questions that folks have asked. There was some earlier on. Rosie, you asked about the sewing machine that was able to sew through the thick cookbook pages. I wonder if you could speak to that a little bit more, how that process worked.
Yeah, you're right. This particular book, this is 58 pages, and we have these industrial sewing machines, which, I mean, in theory should be better than a regular sewing machine. And I thought, well, come on, it'll get through paper. But I was told many times that a stack of paper sort of that thick, which is, you know, take a chunk of paper, is basically wood, and that the needle can't get through the paper no matter how thick the needle is, but it also messes up something else. I don't know what it is. I forget the term, but it throws off the angle. And so the industrial design faculty were not terribly happy the first time we attempted this. So I didn't do it, but I think it does matter. Maybe there's people on here that are a little more versed in it than me. Our pages were just too thick. The number of pages, I think you can sew maybe up to about 30, but we had hit 58. And the previous book that was the type specimens, it was much larger, 11 by 17. And that was approaching 50 pages, and it's just too thick. We tried. The needle gets caught, the paper tears. So we really lucked out with the leather binding neighbor from Chris, our former colleague.
How did you arrange for, this is for Taylor, how did you arrange for the carbon dioxide sensor from home?
Yeah, so with that last book, the carbon dioxide sensor, there is a paper sensor that does exist now, but is not available to the public yet. So I went about those kind of technologies in a way of trying to visualize them for that use in the book. So it is just orange paper, but that technology for the carbon paper sensor does exist. It's just not available to us yet.
I thought your book was so interesting, and it reminded me of Jeff Vandermeer's like Annihilation series and some of his other kind of biofuturist science fiction novels. How did you approach like thinking about what the distant future might look like in a book form? And you talked a little bit through that with some of the glow in the dark pages, and how did that process work for you?
Yeah, so I started out with, there are a lot of projections when it comes to anthropogenic change. And so I really was looking into pointed research for all of them. Like I said at the beginning of each of the books, there were these very specific projections that I found really interesting and that I knew would affect us in pretty significant ways. So when looking at the projections, I would look at that pointed research and just approach what would life be like for a person in that area, and what kind of book would they be reading? What kind of book would they need? How would they need to be reading it? And what is really possible for them? So yeah, for example, in that last book, for the field guide, if they're shrouded in darkness, then it needed to have some way of glowing. And so just thinking about that environment and seeing what sort of design decisions could come from their actual environment. So yeah, a lot of research and figuring out little details as to how to make those kind of things work. Mm-hmm.
I have to say, Taylor has put all of us to shame with how much she's produced at home. When most of us are grumbling about not having resources or access, she's just jamming on these amazing books. It's been fun to watch, and almost embarrassing how much you've done compared to what I feel like I've done in a year. So
Robert asked if any of this is part of an MFA show at the Henry or something else, or the Jacob Lawrence Gallery, I imagine.
Yeah, so this is my project will be at the Henry with the MDes and MFA show, which starts in May 29th through June 27th. So yeah, there will be, the rest of my cohort will also be there if you're interested in seeing the other design projects along with all of the other master's students in the art school.
We unfortunately do not have usually the Bachelor of Design show. The design show would be in the Jake in the spring, right in late June. And unfortunately, due to the pandemic, that is not happening. There will be a great online show and there'll be a presence on campus, but Philbert's book would have been in that graduating show, and Raziah's obviously would have been last spring. So I'll dig up the links and put them in the chat to the design show where you can find those. But unfortunately, yeah, there's just the Henry gets the show, which is really nice for Taylor.
Robert has another question. I was curious about this as well. And Raziah, I think yours in particular, it looks like a book that you could buy somewhere, but I imagine it's actually maybe one of a kind. Do you have any plans to produce them in multiples, or do they already exist in multiples?
No, this book is just, I only have one copy of it so far. Yeah, I think because it's so personal to me, actually, it seems kind of too nerve-wracking to make multiple copies and have other people, because I actually haven't told my mom I've made this book. So she still doesn't know, even a year later. And maybe once I, gather up the courage to be like, hey, mom, I made something cool, um, then maybe I might open it up to the public. But I think that's such a compliment that you thought that it could be sold. So thank you.
It's the wonderful world of art books. Anything's possible. Taylor, what about you?
Yeah, as of right now, I mean, they're all single prints for my thesis, but I am interested in finding some ways to be able to widely distribute it to the public. There definitely will be some things to figure out, especially when it comes to things like handmade paper and the fact that like I use glowing ink to screen print all the pages. And so there's a lot of very particular detailed like labor things. So there'll be some finessing to do with the design, but it is a goal overall.
And I think Philbert's is a one-off, right, Jamie?
Yeah, most of the books that we produce in the class are one-offs, and a lot of blood, sweat, and tears go into every single piece that gets produced. But I echo everyone here. I think Raziah, like, definitely consider making more copies. I think, once you get past the family hurdle. But yeah, these publications are so gorgeous and really special. And that's also a really interesting part of the publishing process, is thinking about, you've made one copy, now what's the next one? How can you use the existing methods of printing, publishing, distribution to make a slightly different edition, or thinking about the economies of printing and all that good stuff. But yeah, these are, I look forward to seeing these out in the world even more than they already are.
I think even it's just interesting as a teacher, a lot of our students are just so used to doing things on screen and then hitting print, and the Epson print comes out. And so the act of physically making something, like Jamie, I know you take them through the paces of how to bind a book and demos, but that's often one of the first times the students are really trimming things and learning how to bind. And so these physical objects become quite precious in the end. So yeah, it's a good learning experience. I think it's something everybody on here probably knows and appreciates, but we have a number of students who come into our offices that are like, whoa, you have so many books, because I just don't have books. Jamie, didn't you say there was someone in one of your classes who didn't have a book at home?
Yeah.
You were doing.
And I was shocked.
It's just strange. It's a different times for different people, I guess.
Annabelle, can you speak a little bit about how the publishing program developed at UW? Because it wasn't there when I was there, but it must have crept in mid-2000s or so.
You mean publication design as a class, or you mean?
Yes, sorry.
Yeah, well, it was there when I got there in 2003. And in fact, Ann Traver taught that from methodology. And then she stepped away and I took over. And then Jamie, I don't know how long you took it over when I moved over to the advanced type class, because they're in the same quarter. I don't know how long, has it been 4 or 5 years for you now teaching that?
Yeah, this past fall was my, I think, 5th year teaching.
Yeah, so it's a senior level class, and the way it works, again, we're on the quarter system. The sophomores are together, all 60 in the 3 majors, and then by junior year they're moving into their major. But junior year we view it as skill building, so it's kind of 3-week projects. You end up with sort of 3 projects each class. I think by the time they hit senior year, It's a lot more, what are you interested in? Find topics you're passionate about. And so, especially I would say in publication design, these are what 8-week projects that they're doing where they're conceiving and developing the content. And so you are giving students time and space to figure that out. And, some fail spectacularly. Jamie can speak to this better than I can, but, or more recently than I can, but it's lovely from my perspective to see the students have time to develop personal projects or projects that mean something to them rather than giving them a brief each time. Like I gave them the cookbook brief, but I thought, oh, everybody's got to weigh into this because it's everybody eats and you've all got something in your family. And even if you don't know what it is, go back in and have a conversation with your family. So that was sort of satisfying there. But, a typeface book, it's cool. They learn from it, but they don't necessarily love it the way they might a recipe. So.
One thing I've noticed, like observing the class over the years and participating in critiques every now and then, is oftentimes the prompts to create these books are, they can touch on really personal qualities. And like, I think from an educator's perspective, it's sometimes hard to offer a criticism of something that's so intensely personal. I see that coming up more and more each year, and I was wondering how you balance those two perspectives, because you also want to like give them a great design education, but you can't tell them like, don't go there.
Well, I'm Jamie, you've got more personal stuff coming up in your classes, so I don't want to put you on the spot. I guess I would say for me, there have been students that have done personal work, and I mean, my graduate school was sort of like that, a lot of personal work. I feel like if it's not something you can share in your portfolio because it's too personal, then maybe it's not something you can be doing in the class. I don't think I've ever told anybody not to do something unless it was just totally inappropriate or didn't satisfy the needs of a project. But I guess I feel like if you're connected to the project and you're passionate about it, I can find a way. And I can still nitpick the shit out of people's widows and end dashes, and I can get them somewhere even if I'm not critiquing their words. And it has to communicate something to other people. So, I mean, Raziah, your book is wonderful, and it seems like a hurdle you'll have to overcome to get it to your mom. But even if your mom never sees it, the rest of the world would love it and appreciate it, because you can see the love and care in those letter forms. So yeah, I think, Tom, I will just say you had a different group of faculty that maybe would never have wanted the personal part. I know who some of your faculty were who have long since retired and are off on boats doing their thing. I don't think personal projects would have been approved of back then, but.
All right, they'll never see this video.
They're wholeheartedly approved of now. I think it's just important.
Let's see, I think we have time for one last quick question, and then we'll have a quick break before the next presentation. Rosie asked if there's a way for non-matriculated students to somehow be involved with the UW book design program. For example, with different talks that were open to the public and ways to get involved that way.
Well, we don't offer classes for non-matriculated students. We don't even offer classes for non-majors of any kind at this point. Certainly lectures, when we get back to having people, we try to make those public. The Jean-Francois Porchet's one was a collaboration with, I think it was a French department. So that one was really made public. But, we try to kind of keep some of the lectures from people connected. If you're ever interested in coming in and doing a critique or sitting in, you can certainly contact Jamie or myself about that. But, we hope to get to things being normal. I will say Zoom has been lovely for bringing in guests from all over the country, even beyond, who wouldn't ordinarily want to make the trek to Seattle and deal with parking and hours in the studio. So we hope to kind of be more open that way. And, publication design is just one class. We are not, this is stuff that's done through the VCD major. So we all love books. Jamie loves books. I love books. My other colleagues do too. So it's not a specific discipline within design. These students are also taking information design and exhibition design and other things too. So.
Well, I think that wraps up this portion of the studio visit. So thank you so much, Annabelle, Raziah, Taylor. Really appreciate your time and sharing your projects with us, as well as Philbert off at his family event. So thank you all so much for participating in this.
Thank you. It was fun to be here. Hope
Thank
to see everybody in person next year.